On a single night in the year 632, the city of Medina fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the sky itself had cracked open. The man who had received revelation from God, who had united a fractured Arabia, who had walked among his people as a guide, a friend, and a father figure, had just breathed his last. Grown warriors wept in the streets. Some refused to believe it. One companion stood in the mosque, sword drawn, shouting that anyone who claimed the prophet was dead would be cut down where they stood. In that single moment of chaos, an entire nation could have collapsed into civil war before it had even begun. And it was one man, calm, unshaken, who walked into that storm and, with a few sentences, saved the future of an entire faith. His name was Abu Bakr. And this is the story of how a quiet merchant from Mecca became the most trusted man in Islamic history. Long before he was a caliph, Abu Bakr was simply known as Abdullah ibn Abi Quhafa, a respected cloth merchant in Mecca, a man known across the city for two things that rarely go together in business: honesty and generosity. He wasn't the richest man in Mecca, but he was among the most trusted, the kind of merchant people sought out specifically because his word was worth more than a contract. When Muhammad, peace be upon him, first received revelation and began quietly sharing it, it was Abu Bakr, his close friend of many years, who became the first free adult man to accept Islam, without hesitation, without demanding proof, without a single moment of doubt. When asked later why he believed so instantly, his answer became one of the most quoted lines in Islamic history. He said that he had never doubted Muhammad in matters of truth before, so why would he begin now, over something as significant as a message from God? That single decision changed the course of his life completely. Mecca in the 7th century was not a place that welcomed new ideas quietly. The moment word spread that a respected merchant had accepted this new faith, Abu Bakr became a target, socially and physically. But instead of retreating, he did something almost unheard of for a man of his social standing. He began using his own wealth to buy the freedom of enslaved Muslims who were being tortured for their faith, men and women with no family, no protection, and no way to defend themselves. He freed them not for recognition, but because he believed no human being should be owned or beaten for what they believed. Some of the men he freed went on to become among the most respected companions in Islamic history. His fortune shrank considerably during these years, not through poor business, but through deliberate, quiet sacrifice. As persecution against the early Muslims intensified, the moment came that would test Abu Bakr's loyalty beyond anything he had faced before. When the Prophet was warned of a plot to assassinate him in Mecca, he had to flee the city under the cover of night, and there was only one man he trusted enough to take with him. Abu Bakr didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He left behind his home, his business, his entire life in Mecca, and joined the Prophet on a journey that could easily have ended in death. The two men hid inside a cave on Mount Thawr while search parties combed the surrounding hills, close enough at one point that their voices could be heard from inside the cave. Abu Bakr, terrified not for himself but for the Prophet's life, whispered that if their enemies simply looked down, they would be seen. The Prophet's response, calm and unwavering, became one of the most repeated lines in Islamic tradition. "Do not grieve, for God is with us." That cave, that night, and that quiet loyalty earned Abu Bakr a title that stayed with him for the rest of his life, as Siddiq, the truthful one, the one who never once doubted. For the next years, Abu Bakr remained close to the Prophet's side, not as a distant advisor, but as a genuine companion, present at nearly every major event in the early Muslim community. His daughter, Aisha, would later become one of the Prophet's wives, tying their families together even further. When the Prophet grew ill in his final days, unable to lead the daily prayers himself, it was Abu Bakr he chose to lead the congregation in his place, a decision that many companions later saw as a quiet, deliberate signal of who the Prophet trusted most to guide the community. Then came that devastating night in Medina, the death of the Prophet, and the chaos that followed. With grief turning into confusion, and confusion threatening to turn into division, Abu Bakr stepped forward, not with authority he claimed for himself, but with a truth the community needed to hear immediately. He reminded them, quoting directly from the Quran, that Muhammad was nothing more than a messenger, and messengers before him had passed away too. He said the words that steadied an entire nation on the brink of collapse. Whoever worshipped Muhammad, let them know that Muhammad is dead, but whoever worshipped God, let them know that God is alive and never dies. The panic in the mosque broke almost instantly. Grief remained, but the fear of collapse did not. In the days that followed, the leading companions gathered at a place called Saqifa to decide who would lead the growing Muslim community forward. Tensions ran high between different tribes, each with legitimate claims and concerns. It was in this delicate, fragile moment that Abu Bakr was chosen, not because he sought the position, but because those closest to him, who had watched his character for over 20 years, could not imagine trusting anyone else with it. He accepted the responsibility with visible reluctance, standing before the people and saying something no ruler in that era would typically say. He told them plainly that he was not the best among them, that if he did well, they should support him, and if he did wrong, they should correct him, because obedience to him only mattered as long as he obeyed God. His time as Caliph lasted just over 2 years, but they were arguably some of the most critical years in the survival of the early Muslim state. Almost immediately after the Prophet's death, several tribes across Arabia began abandoning Islam, some refusing to pay the mandatory charity, others following self-proclaimed prophets who emerged in the chaos following Muhammad's passing. Many senior companions urged caution, worried that fighting so many battles at once would tear the fragile new state apart. Abu Bakr disagreed, firmly and without wavering. He said he would fight anyone who tried to separate prayer from charity, even if it meant fighting alone. This series of conflicts, later known as the Wars of Apostasy, tested his leadership more than anything else in his rule, and it was his unwavering resolve during this period that many historians credit with holding the young Islamic state together at its most vulnerable moment. While managing these internal conflicts, Abu Bakr also authorized military campaigns that would later shape the geography of the entire region, entrusting brilliant commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid to lead forces against both internal rebellion and external threats from neighboring empires. Yet even as his authority expanded, his personal life remained almost identical to how it had been before he held any power at all. He continued living simply, refusing a lavish salary from the state treasury, accepting only a modest stipend, and there are accounts of him still tending to household tasks personally, including milking goats for elderly neighbors, a task he had done long before becoming caliph, and one he apparently saw no reason to stop doing afterward. One of the most significant decisions of his rule almost never happened. After a brutal battle at Yamama against forces led by a rival claimant to prophethood, a devastating number of those who had memorized the entire Quran by heart were killed in the fighting. A senior companion, alarmed by how quickly the number of memorizers was shrinking, urged Abu Bakr to authorize the compilation of the Quran into a single, complete written manuscript, something that had never been formally done before. Abu Bakr initially hesitated, cautious about doing something the Prophet himself had never explicitly ordered. But after careful consideration, he agreed, appointing a trusted scribe to gather every verse from memory, from written fragments, and from surviving companions, cross-checking each one meticulously. That single decision, made under pressure and grief, preserved the text that would remain unchanged for the next 14 centuries. As his health began to decline near the end of his rule, Abu Bakr turned his attention to the future of the community he had worked so hard to stabilize. Rather than leaving the question of succession open to potential conflict, as had happened after the Prophet's death, he consulted extensively with the senior companions and ultimately recommended Umar ibn al-Khattab as his successor, a decision that surprised some given the sharp differences in their personalities, but one rooted in Abu Bakr's confidence that Umar possessed the strength needed to protect what had been built. He passed away in the year 634, only 2 years after taking on leadership, having spent that time not accumulating power, but consistently giving it away to freed slaves, to a fragile young nation, and finally, to the man he believed could carry it forward. What remains most striking about Abu Bakr's life isn't a single dramatic moment, though there were several. It's the consistency, The same quiet steadiness in a cave outside Mecca as in the mosque of Medina. The same humility as a wealthy merchant and as the ruler of an expanding state. The same refusal to abandon what he believed was right, whether that meant defending an enslaved stranger with his own money or holding together a fracturing nation with nothing but conviction and a few unwavering words. He never sought to be remembered. He simply refused, at every single turn, to doubt. This is only the beginning of the story of leadership after the Prophet. 4 men would carry that responsibility in the years that followed, each facing challenges unlike the one before them, each shaping the future of the Islamic world in ways still felt today. To see the full series covering all 4 caliphs of Islam, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.